My blissful self. Today, let us know something about deep sleep and samadhi. Usually, in the waking state, nobody is happy. They say there is no happiness at all in the waking state. Some say there will be only happiness after death. And even after death, there is no happiness. The evil spirits will be in a position to enter others' body and they cry and they say there is no happiness at all to us. And if that is the case, when there is happiness, so definitely in deep sleep there is happiness. But what is the nature of happiness in a deep sleep? And what is the nature of happiness in samadhi, in the jnana samadhi? Let us know the difference between deep sleep and jnana samadhi. In a deep sleep, the desires of the sensory objects have been subsided. But in samadhi, the desires of sensory objects have been destroyed. That is the exact difference between deep sleep and samadhi. So in deep sleep, the desires of the sensory objects have been given up through forgetfulness. But in samadhi, the desires of sensory objects have been completely destroyed. While going to samadhi, one will be in a position to know whether there is happiness in the sensory objects or not, whether there is happiness in a body consciousness or not. And by inquiring like this, one will be certain that there is no happiness in the sensory objects and in having body consciousness. Completely the sensory impressions have been destroyed in a jnana samadhi. In a deep sleep, there is a temporary happiness. If we want to have temporary happiness, we can go to sleep. But there will be no permanent happiness in deep sleep. When we wake up from deep sleep to the waking state, again the unhappiness begins. So if at all we have to have temporary happiness, we can go to sleep. But many people have will have no sleep at all. And when they don't get sleep, they become mad. But if at all we have to have permanent happiness, we have to attain Dhyana Samadhi. When we wake up from Dhyana Samadhi to the waking state, so there will be permanent happiness. During a deep sleep, what exactly happens therein is, there is forgetfulness and there is experience of bliss. During deep sleep, the experience of bliss is continued, but there is no understanding that the experience of bliss has been continued. But during Samadhi, Dhyana Samadhi, what exactly happens then is, there is consciousness. In Dhyana Samadhi, there is consciousness. And the experience of bliss has been continued in a Dhyana Samadhi. And one knows that one is experiencing bliss in Dhyana Samadhi. In a deep sleep, there is no knowledge at all. Nothing will be known during deep sleep. But in Samadhi, there is the knowledge of one's own true self. One knows what exactly is his true nature, like that. In the Dhyana Samadhi, one knows that one is of the nature of consciousness. And one knows that consciousness is bliss. When there is consciousness, there is bliss. And when there is no consciousness, there is no bliss. In a deep sleep, there is no distraction of the sensory objects, worldly or otherworldly. When we wake up from the deep sleep, again there will be passion for sensory objects of this world or of the other world, like that. But in Dhyana Samadhi, there is complete dispassion for the worldly objects and the other worldly objects. Because while attaining Samadhi, there is the necessity of dispassion of the sensory objects of this world or the sensory objects of the other world. And not only that, one has to transcend the body consciousness. One has to inquire whether one is the body or not, or whether one is consciousness, like that. So in this way, and one who will be in a position to remember the sensory objects will not be happy, and he cannot experience the bliss of the Dhyana Samadhi. And one, when transcends body consciousness, can only attain the Atman consciousness, or he will be in a position to know that his nature is consciousness and bliss. So that is how in the Dhyana Samadhi there is complete dispassion. And in the Jnana Samadhi, there is no body consciousness at all. There is dispassion for the worldly sensory objects or the other worldly sensory objects. When one awakens from deep sleep to the waking state, there will be rebirth. One who has been born will die. And one who is dead will again take rebirth. Why there is rebirth? Because there are the impressions or the desires of the sensory objects. And when one is in a position to give up his body, at the time of death, the desires of the sensory objects remain. And when the desires of the sensory objects remain, and one has not got permanent happiness, so he'll take other body or many other bodies to attain permanent happiness. But who has attained Jnana Samadhi, so he has destroyed all the desires of the sensory objects. And not only that, he has transcended the body consciousness. And he has stood still in the Atmic consciousness. And he has attained the permanent happiness. And for that person, there is no necessity to take birth because he has already attained the permanent happiness. And the permanent happiness is the goal of human life. That is how he will not take rebirth after the death of this body. When one awakens from the deep sleep to the waking state, the misery is not at all destroyed. Again, there will be misery. The misery will be continued in the waking state. Why the misery is continued in the waking state? What is the cause of misery? Because the cause of misery is due to the desires for sensory objects of this world or the other, and the body consciousness. Knowing that I am the body, I am this gross body, like that. And these are the cause of misery. So in a deep sleep, these have not been removed by discrimination. And that is how one who awakes from deep sleep to this mundane waking, the misery will be continued as usual. But one who awakes to the waking state from a Samadhi, the misery has been completely destroyed. There is no misery at all. Why there is no misery at all? Because the desires of the sensory objects of this world and the other world have been destroyed by the inquiry whether there is happiness in the sensory objects or not, whether one is this gross body or not, or whether one is of the nature of consciousness, like that. So, no desire for sensory objects, no body consciousness, but there is self-consciousness, and that is how one who awakens from Samadhi to the mundane waking state. So there is no misery at all. The so-called deep sleep doesn't show us the nature of our true self. By going into sleep, we cannot know our real nature of our own self. But in Samadhi, we are aware of our true nature of self. Samadhi is like a mirror. In the mirror, when the mirror stands still firm, and the mirror is firm, and when the mirror is clean, so in that firm, clean mirror, so there will be the reflection of our face of the gross body. The mirror is gross, and the face of our gross body is gross, and it is reflected. The reflection of the face of the gross body is reflected in the gross mirror. But during Dhyana Samadhi, what happens therein is the mirror of experiencing happiness is the mind. We are always blissful only. We are always of the nature of conscious only. But when our mind becomes agitated, so in the agitated mind, our true self, that is, of the nature of consciousness and bliss, is not reflected. But in Dhyana Samadhi, our mind has become motionless. Our mind has become calm. So in that calm mind, our true face, that is consciousness and bliss, is reflected in the mirror of mind. That means Jnana Samadhi is in a position to show us our real face, our true nature, that is consciousness and bliss. Once we attain Jnana Samadhi, there is no necessity of attaining it again. So that's how, by going to deep sleep, we cannot have the knowledge of our real self. But by attaining Jnana Samadhi, we can have our we can have the experience of our real nature, that is consciousness and bliss. If we attain a deep sleep, so there will be the desire to attain bliss. If we go to deep sleep and awaken from deep sleep and come to the waking state, so the desire to attain bliss remains. But if once we attain the Jnana Samadhi, there will be no desire to attain the bliss as such. In a deep sleep, what happens therein is the body consciousness has been subsided by forgetfulness. But in Dhyana Samadhi, the body consciousness is destroyed completely by inquiring whether one is the body, gross body, or subtle body, or the causal body, or one is of the a conscious nature, like that. So that's how, in a deep sleep, the body consciousness has been subsided. But in Samadhi, the body consciousness has been completely destroyed. So by going to sleep, and if we awaken to the mundane waking, so there remains the misery. The misery remains because there is the body consciousness and there is infatuation of the sensory objects. But when we attain Dhyana Samadhi and we come to the mundane waking from a Dhyana Samadhi, there is no misery. There is no misery because the body consciousness has been transcended. And one firmly stands in one's true nature, that is consciousness and bliss. And before that, the infatuation for the sensory objects has been completely destroyed by the inquiry whether there is happiness in sensory objects or not. So when a person will be in a position to or when he will go to a deep sleep, during a deep sleep, the head falls like this. Because in a deep sleep, there is forgetfulness. That is how the head falls. But during a Jnana Samadhi, the head doesn't fall. The head doesn't fall because there is consciousness in the Dhyana Samadhi. In a deep sleep, the waking and dream states have been given. During deep sleep, there is no dream. and there is no waking. So the waking and the dream states have been given up. And they have been given up. But one is not in a position to know that they are shapeless, that there is no happiness in dream or the waking state. But one who attains Jnana Samadhi, all the three states become shapeless. When one attains Jnana Samadhi, he has the firm knowledge that there is no happiness in the waking, there is no happiness in the dream, and even there is no ignorance at all. If there is ignorance, there is unhappiness. So, one who attains Jnana Samadhi firmly knows that there is no happiness in waking, dream, and deep sleep. All the three states are shapeless. So there is no happiness at all. In a deep sleep, there is no waking and even dream. But in Jnana Samadhi, there is no waking, there is no dream, and there is no sleep. All the three states are not at all existing in the Jnana Samadhi. During deep sleep, there is no witness consciousness. That means one has not become witness to deep sleep, to dream, and the waking. But in Jnana Samadhi, one becomes witness, Sakshi, to the waking, to the dream, and to the deep sleep. This state has been called as the superconscious state or the Dhyana Samadhi. So there is no necessity of purity of the mind if one has to attain deep sleep. If one has been in a position to be tired and wearied, he can get the deep sleep. But if at all we have to attain Dhyana Samadhi, there is the absolute necessary of mental purity. One has to be sure that there is no happiness at all in sensory objects of this world or the other world. The pollution of the mind is exactly that. There is happiness in the sensory objects. But one who will be in a position to attain a Dhyana Samadhi, before that, he has to make his mind completely pure. And the dirt of the mind is the understanding that there is happiness in the sensory objects. And the other dirt is the body consciousness. One has to transcend the body consciousness. Then only he will be in a position to attain Dhyana Samadhi. So to attain a Dhyana Samadhi, the mental purity, that is, The understanding that there is no happiness in sensory objects. And the other one is not at all this body, but one is the pure consciousness, blissful nature. So to attain a dhyana samadhi, complete purity of the mind is required. So that is a must. So in a deep sleep, we say samadhi, no? Dhi means intellect. Buddhi. Dhi means intellect. Samadhi. Sama. Sama means even. In deep sleep, the intellect has become even. Sama. It has become sama through ignorance. And that is how usually the deep sleep has been called as Adhyatma Samadhi. By going to deep sleep, the intellect has become even through ignorance, Adhyana. So deep sleep is called the state of Adhyana Samadhi. But in Adhyana Samadhi, the intellect has become even sama. It has become sama by dhyana. There is no happiness in the sensory objects. Why we have to have the desire? I am not the body at all. And why I have to be in body consciousness? I am of the nature of consciousness and bliss. So by attaining a dhyana samadhi, our intellect becomes even sama through knowledge, through consciousness. And that is how it has been called as a dhyana samadhi. In a deep sleep, what exactly happens therein is the body consciousness has been subsided. In its cause, ignorance. There is no body consciousness. The body consciousness has been subsided. What is the cause for body consciousness? Ignorance of one's own true self. So the body consciousness has been subsided. In its cause, ignorance. But in dhyana samadhi, the body consciousness has been completely destroyed. Then again, in a deep sleep, when we will get the when we will get sleep, so we'll have soothing sensation. So we'll be in a position to nod. So this has been called the soothing sensation. So while going to sleep, we get the soothing sensation. Nidreya Sudhu. But while one will be attaining the dhyana samadhi, so there will be attained the thread of bliss. That means the Ananda Sutra or the Brahma Sutra. When the soothing sensation is attained, and that again becomes a deep sleep. It deepens. The soothing sensation deepens and it results in the deep sleep. But in a Dhyana Samadhi, the thread of bliss is there. There is the knowledge that I am consciousness and bliss. Later it will be transformed. That means Turiyatita. So the knowledge that one is consciousness and bliss is transcended. There will be no knowledge that I am consciousness and bliss. And that has been called the Turiyatita. So what exactly happens there is, when one goes to deep sleep and awakens to the mundane waking, he thinks that this world is real and this worldly consciousness gives happiness like that. This knowledge will be there. But when one attains Dhyana Samadhi, so you will have the firm knowledge that the waking state, the dream state, and the deep sleep, they are completely unreal. And all these three states are of the nature of unhappiness. So that is the understanding of his who has attained the Dhyana Samadhi. So we will continue the remaining part of the deep sleep and Samadhi. That is, what exactly are the differences between the deep sleep and Samadhi in the next lecture. By this, I end my speech of the differences of deep sleep and Samadhi.